Crispus Attucks, a sailor of African and indigenous ancestry, died on March 5, 1770, after British soldiers fired at colonists in what became known as the Boston Massacre. Death instantly transformed Attucks from an anonymous sailor into a martyr for the revolutionary cause. But this story tells us a lot about how race affected people's lives in colonial New England. Crispus Attucks first appeared in the historical record in a 1750 advertisement placed in the Boston Gazette. William Brown of Framingham placed an advertisement to call for the return of a 27-year-old enslaved man named Crispus. Attucks was described as a mixed-race man who stood 6 foot 2 inches. How and when he gained his freedom is unknown, but at the time of his death, sources did not identify Attucks as enslaved or formerly enslaved. Attucks's success escaping from slavery may have been due to his changing his name. Early coverage and investigations into the details of the Boston Massacre refer to Attucks as Michael Johnson. Crispus Attucks may have also changed his name because the last name Attucks came from the indigenous Natick word for deer. His first name was probably given to him by his enslaver, who followed a colonial-era trend of naming enslaved people after ancient Romans. Attucks shared the name Crispus with the son of Emperor Constantine. Another reason for Attucks's success escaping slavery may have been his employment as a dock worker and sailor. There was always a great need for workers in these jobs, and many people of color found employment here where they would have been excluded otherwise. However, as a black laborer, Attucks still felt competition from British soldiers, who often took part-time jobs during their off-duty hours. British soldiers were not paid well, and they often looked for extra work to supplement their low wages. A fight between Boston rope makers and 3 British soldiers on Friday, March 2, 1770, set the stage for the fight that would break out 3 days later. The following Monday night, tensions escalated when a soldier entered a pub to look for work, and instead found the group of angry sailors who had been part of the previous fight. Patriot pamphleteers immediately dubbed the shooting on March 5 the Boston Massacre, and its victims became instant symbols of the colonists' fight against British tax policy. However, Paul Revere's famous engraving of the event fails to depict Crispus Attucks as a black man. Dock workers, especially black dock workers, were often framed as aggressive, and Revere sought to shape public opinion by depicting the colonists who took part in the event as peaceful gentlemen. Instead, these racist views prevented Revere from showing a black man as a victim. Crispus Attucks just did not fit the narrative that Revere was trying to communicate. In the trial, defense lawyer John Adams reinforced this idea that black dock workers were aggressive. He painted Attucks as an aggressor who provoked the shooting. He played to the jury's prejudices about race and class, describing those in the crowd as a motley rabble of saucy boys, Negroes, Irish Teagues, and outlandish Jack Tars. In other words, those in the crowd were young, lower class, black, Irish, or sailors from out of town. Despite these racist views and the laws and customs that regulated where black men and women could be buried in Boston, Attucks was laid to rest in the Granary Burying Ground, along with the other victims of the shooting. But it was not until 1856 that artist J.H. Bufford portrayed Crispus Attucks at the center of the Boston Massacre. 2 years later, in 1858, decades after the United States had won independence from Britain, a Crispus Attucks Day was inaugurated by people in Boston who wanted to end slavery. By the 1850s, Crispus Attucks had become not only a symbol of America's fight for independence, but also Black Americans' fight for freedom. In 1888, the Crispus Attucks Monument was erected on the Boston Common. However, 100 years after the Boston Massacre, some groups still tried to cast Attucks as a troublemaker not worthy of recognition. As Black Americans continued to fight for their civil rights in the years after the Civil War, some people tried to stop them from gaining access to those rights by portraying them as villains. The memorial to Crispus Attucks credits him with being the first to defy, the first to die. Today, Crispus Attucks is recognized as the first casualty of the American Revolution, the first to give his life for the freedom of our country.